This is the Third Place Podcast, recording from the JLP CPA sponsored studio. I'm Brian Dolan, and right next to me, right there, Lauren Cuevas.
Home is your first place, work is your second place, and this is your third place, where the Christian community gathers.
Bonus episode, bonus episode, bonus episode,
Alert,
red alert.
Alert.
Very excited to offer a bonus episode to you. We were inspired to do it because we had an interview scheduled with our good friend, Dr. Glen Duerr of Cedarville University.
Yep.
Talking about the big summit happening between President Trump and Russian President Putin. And since we could talk about that wonderful current event, we figured why not share it with you right away, as quick as we can, so that you can have this information as world events unfold. There was that, or like wait for a few weeks, and then you're like, what's wrong with these people
Idiots, yeah.
releasing this now? So special thanks to our sponsors, by the way, Christian Children's Home of Ohio, Edgewater Investment Group. Also, thanks to our sponsor of my brand new morning show coming up, KHCB. It's Upliftd Mornings with Brian, upliftedstream.org, and JLP CPAs. They're fantastic. Quick sponsorship for a bonus episode. But now let's jump right in and hear what Dr. Glen Duerr has to say from a uniquely Christian perspective about what's happening with the summit and with the U.S. and Russia. With us now on the Third Place Podcast, Dr. Glen Duerr, who is the chair of the History and Government Department at Cedarville University, also a professor of international studies as well. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Duerr.
Great to be with you both.
So the day we're recording this, very big day. It's a big summit in Alaska with Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump. Why Alaska? What's that about?
There are several components to it. One is that the United States did not ratify the Rome Statute that brought into being the International Criminal Court, even though President Clinton signed it. Even though he knew Congress wouldn't support it, he did it as something that he wanted to do. And as such, because there's an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin among ICC signatories, and the United States is not one, it's one of the reasons why this is in the United States and not in Europe or another signee. Another one is proximity. I mean, Alaska was actually purchased from Russia, Tsarist Russia, in 1867, and proximity-wise is very close to Russia's eastern side. And it's also being held at Elmendorf-Richardson Base, a joint base between the Air Force and the Army, which was very, very prominent during the Cold War. And so for President Trump, it's something of a show of power towards Vladimir Putin. But for Putin's side, it's simply, I think, not an ICC country and fairly close to Russia if he's in the east of it anyway, for regular governance and business.
Now, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, I feel like far too many people just kind of view history in terms of just this very moment. Now, if we look at Vladimir Putin, even though he has the title of president, correct me if I'm wrong, I tend to be melodramatic, he's a dictator, and he's going to stay in power because he wants to. He's not actually elected. Okay, so fix that.
There's a lot to it, and so Russia was actually fairly democratic in the 1990s, and when Vladimir Putin became the prime minister, so think vice president, although it's not a neat comparison, he was elevated to the position of president when Boris Yeltsin stepped down due to health, and then he was legitimately elected in March of 2000 with 53% of the vote. By 2004, it was already beginning to shift, although one could make a case that he was elected. And then he actually did step down in 2008 to become prime minister. And under the Russian constitution, like some other constitutions, Brazil, for example, a president can come back after serving 2 terms, and that's what he did in 2012, and he's been in ever since. The problem with that is he's fully manipulated the Constitution. It's not free nor fair. He was elected, quote unquote, again in 2024, but it's not free nor fair, nor by any metric within political science or people that measure democratization. Is he considered a democratic president? Russia is considered very much authoritarian. And so, yes, carries the title of president, but I typically just call him Vladimir Putin and reserve the title of president or prime minister or chancellor to someone that's actually been elected.
Now, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Saddam Hussein consistently elected by the Iraqi people?
Yes, and it's interesting how some countries will actually go through having an election, quote unquote, even if there's no opposition. Most countries in the world do that, with very few exceptions, China being one, although they have a vote in the National People's Congress technically as well. So it's a bit of a show to try and say there's legitimacy to the outside world as well as to an internal community that says, look, we've gone through our channels under our Constitution. Look, I'm democratically elected, but it's in no way, shape, or form fully democratic. It is worth noting that there is an opposition in Russia. There is an independent media. As examples, there are typically 5 candidates that run, but it's a farce. It's put together as a circus, and Vladimir Putin is made to look like he's the only reasonable option because effectively his opposition include neo-Nazis and communists, and I say those terms with genuine meaning. That's what they actually are, and that's what they actually stand for as political parties. And so Vladimir Putin looks somewhat reasonable standing next to those others. Usually there's an independent candidate that's not allowed to really campaign, put up billboards. There are strict restrictions in terms of what he or she can do. And then a lot of candidates are not actually allowed to even be on the ballot. So in that way, Russia's not democratic in any way. And then a lot of major opposition leaders, Alexei Navalny comes to mind. He wasn't allowed on the ballot, and he was eventually killed by the Putin regime.
So then, I mean, as I get to the core of this, it becomes, when you're negotiating with somebody, becomes an issue of trust and moral compass. Like the three of us have a common moral compass in that we're followers of Christ. For an authoritarian dictator, which in all intents and purposes is what Vladimir Putin is, he's just out for himself, right? I mean, is he even out for Russia?
He's out for legacy. He's out for power. Even during the Cold War, when he was KGB agent in East Germany, he had the communist leader, Leonid Brezhnev, on his wall, but he also had Peter the Great. And I think Peter the Great is instructive. He was the Tsar of Russia in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. And he engaged in a massive war, the Great Northern War that lasted for 21 years against Sweden, and actually led to the creation of St. Petersburg, now the second most prominent city in Russia. And I think that's very instructive. He's out for historical legacy. He's out for the greatness of Russia. He's also very much out for himself in terms of maintaining his position, his power, and really what he wants to be known for in the history books.
Now, if I remember correctly as well, when he invaded Ukraine years ago, it was based on a patent lie, totally made up. Everyone knows it's made up. And he was talking about some kind of genocide, right?
In 2021, he wrote an open essay in the summer, roughly 7,000 words, talking about how Ukraine and Russia are inextricably linked, should be together, they're one people. All of that has falsehoods. There's clearly been a separate Ukraine in various parts of history. And even though it's very, very complicated, there is a separate Ukrainian language, nationalism, all of these things that have prevailed throughout time. And a lot of it was built on lies in terms of Vladimir Putin's essay. He also, as you know, did downplay the Holodomor genocide of 1931 to 1933, roughly, where an estimated 2, 3, but upwards of 10 million Ukrainians were starved to death by not being allowed out of Ukraine within the Soviet Union. It sounds awfully weird because Ukraine was historically and is still now known as the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. It produces massive amounts of wheat, But due to a number of Stalin's policies, it really starved to death at least hundreds of thousands, but probably in the millions of Ukrainians. Putin very much downplayed that, doesn't call it a genocide, and has used Ukraine's historic position within the Soviet Union and within Tsarist Russia as rationale for his brutal invasion on February the 24th, 2022.
So then if you're called into the White House / Alaska, I guess, the Army base, and you're asked to advise the president, and you know you're dealing with an authoritarian dictator who's out for himself and for the greatness of Russia, who invaded Ukraine on false pretenses and lies, what's your game plan in this negotiation?
On the one hand, it's Machiavellian. You've got to have that kind of clear-eyed realism that comes with it, knowing that he's in it for legacy, that he's in it for power. But at the same time, there is just this pragmatic side of you've got to deal with a brutal dictator if you want to end this war. And President Trump has campaigned on ending the conflict. He's tried to intervene in places like Armenia and Azerbaijan that have gone to war, Thailand and Cambodia that were on the brink of conflict, the Abraham Accords. I think he's really trying to limit a number of these conflicts because typically a smaller conflict in a part of the world can envelop much wider. World War II was like that, World War I, the Napoleonic Wars, the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 was like that, and it went global. And that's the real danger of allowing this to continue and to foment. And so I think what has been leaked is that President Trump has a plan, a strategy. It looks actually very generous to Putin. The other side of that, though, is Zelensky is not at the table, the president of Ukraine, and may not agree to wide swaths of it. And a number of European leaders may really be concerned with it as well. The other thing we have to bear in mind is that Vladimir Putin always plays the long game. Okay, there's a stop in the war for a few years. He just reloads, gets ready again. In another 5 years, he invades again. He did so to Ukraine. He annexed Crimea illegally in 2014 and took pieces of the oblasts of Donetsk and Luhansk, equivalents of states, and then he stopped. And it was kind of frozen there. And then in 2022, he came back for more. He's the type of character that plays that long game. And so making a deal with Putin has to be done with extreme caution and significant protections for Ukraine and security guarantees. Putin has said NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization membership is off the table. But what actually protects Ukraine? Maybe it is having Americans on the ground for the rationale of cultivating rare earth minerals, lithium, copper, things of that type of nature that may have U.S. economic interests on the ground. But there's also a caution of hollowing out Ukraine's resources that it needs to rebuild its country because it's been bombed for the last 3.5 years. And so this is fraught with dangers. I think President Trump knows all of this. It's not news to him, but he has to be very much cautious in terms of negotiating with Putin.
So why isn't Ukrainian President Zelensky invited to this party / negotiation?
I think this is several stages. President Trump is trying to align, trying to see if Russia's even willing to play ball and to negotiate. Because in the past, Vladimir Putin has come to the table, but he's been very unserious. He's met with President Trump, but then he's also opted not to meet with him. And President Trump has really been pretty angry at that, just being stood up and with Putin unserious about ending a brutal war that has probably killed in the millions of people. It's been downplayed by Putin in terms of his military losses, but it's probably very, very significant. And like I said, in the low millions as well. And so President Trump has said within 2 minutes, I'll have a sense of whether or not Putin is ready to negotiate. So this whole meeting could end very, very quickly on the one hand. But if there is a willingness, then I think it's getting together what Russia's willing to accept and then bringing Zelensky in, and then maybe a negotiation thereafter. But it's a multi-stage negotiation, is I think the plan for this.
And in some sense, since both sides are continuing to war, it's in the interest of the world for peace to come in here. And so it would seem to me that President Trump is just trying to figure out, what do we have to do to get Putin to talk about stopping, right? I mean, is it as simple as that?
I think it's fair because, like I've said, these smaller conflicts can foment, they can grow larger. Putin probably has a list of other countries like Moldova, even parts of Finland. But then, well into different parts of Eastern Europe, from Poland into East Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, areas that when he was in the KGB were under the Soviet Union or satellites of the Soviet Union. And as such, going back to Peter the Great, I think that's what he ultimately wants to accomplish. He is turning 73 years old this year, Putin, in October. And so, is he trying to do something for his wider legacy before he becomes too old to govern? That's probably part of it. But there's been a real difficulty of just getting Putin to the table. A lot of European leaders have tried to do different things, but he won't negotiate with them, nor is there the appropriateness in his mind of meeting with an equal. Someone like President Trump is there because the United States remains a major superpower in the world and certainly the most powerful global power as well.
Now, I've seen in some portions of conservatism in America almost fascination, or dare I say, love for Vladimir Putin. What is behind that?
It's unfortunately true, I think, in sections of the far left, sections of the far right. They see someone that's powerful that can get things done on the surface. The reality is that Russia has stagnated. Its economy is so deeply dependent on the energy sector, and that what appears to be on some slick YouTube videos is not actually the reality. I don't think anyone would actually want that. And my response to this is often, well, go visit Russia, go see what it's actually like. If you think it's so good, just give it 3 days. You will see that it's not what it looks like. The other side of it is, in our culture, we have seen the advance of progressivism in very significant ways, and for some in very conservative circles, maybe a stronger hand is needed to push back. Putin has been very heavy-handed against anything that's considered progressive, and there's an appeal there to a certain segment. Having said that, I think in the United States we've seen similar debates happen, and we're even seeing now a lot of corporations push back against the overt progressive agendas that we have seen. And so it goes to show that it can be done in very democratic ways, that you don't need autocracy to do that. But there is, unfortunately, still, I think, a minute appeal of a Putin in some segments of the U.S. populace.
So if I'm understanding you right, on some scale of political ideology, Putin actually is conservative.
Yes, and it's a very Russian conservatism. It does overlay to some degree with conservatism in the U.S. and elsewhere in Europe, but it's not in the democratic nature. Putin has revived the Russian Orthodox Church that really wasn't powerful since Ivan the Terrible. And even his idol, Peter the Great, was very much opposed to the Russian Orthodox Church, mocked it very openly and brazenly. And we've also seen the question of, well, what do you do in terms of conservative foreign policy? Because for Vladimir Putin, his view of it is to re-expand, to recreate, in my view, the historic Russian Empire, not so much the Soviet Union because of communism and its ties to Marxist ideology. I think Putin has moved on from that and has kind of taken from his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, okay, then there's a need for a selective market, but it's not a true market in any way, shape, or form that we have in the United States or many other democratic countries. And so I think that it all plays into this, but it gets into a definition of conservatism. But Vladimir Putin, in the way I teach it in class, is very much a Russian conservative, where national greatness is important, where the energy sector has really bolstered Russia's economic position again, but it's very much about maintaining power and standing in the international community, as well as reviving historic, traditional, the Russian Orthodox Church being one, even to the detriment of other Christian denominations, Roman Catholics, Protestants, etc.
Now, doesn't he also have some policies that maybe American Christians could look at and go, I don't know, I'm kind of for that, right? He's very anti-homosexual, correct, in his policies and such?
Yes, absolutely. And that's been a long-standing position. And so this is where I was getting at in terms of the rise of progressivism in the United States and elsewhere in Europe. It's seen in a number of conservative circles as being very decadent and problematic. And, to some degree, I'd agree with that personally. It's an overreach even within a free society. At some point, it's trampling upon conservative and Christian values. But at the same time, in a free society, it's different. You allow for an open marketplace and open commons where people can make a point, and I, as a Christian, can come into the public square and likewise give my positions as well. Where Vladimir Putin gains support in some circles is he's been so forceful with it and has won, quote unquote, but when you give up freedom, you give up freedom. And that's why I tell my friends in these circles, like, just go to Russia for a few days, see how it goes for you.
Yeah, and I think it also shows we can't reduce our favoritism of a world leader to one issue. We have to look at it in a wider lens, right?
Absolutely, because while the focus right now is on Russia's brutal campaign in Ukraine, he's been doing this for years. He did it to the country of Georgia in 2008. He has meddled in all kinds of elections, but also airspace. There have been intelligence infiltrations. He funds a lot of far left and far right political parties to do his bidding. He's divided the European Union and NATO. And that's just scratching the surface. I mean, he's really very much, in my view, wants to put together again the Russian Empire, and that landmass expands and continues to expand. And where does it stop? Mm-hmm. And that is a question for freedom-loving people. If you actually love liberty, you cannot love Vladimir Putin as well.
Now, if we're to just pretend like we're in your class, right? And I raise my hand as classes start here soon, and I'm like, Dr. Duerr, because I'm a lot younger then, right? And maybe my voice is higher. Who should Christians support in this conflict? Do we support Russia? Do we support Ukraine? Or is it not that simple?
I think we should have significant support for Ukraine because Ukraine was attacked, and Ukraine is a sovereign country. And Russia even signed the Budapest Memorandum to uphold Ukraine's sovereignty in exchange for Ukraine giving up nuclear weaponry that were located in Ukraine following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We, the United States, signed it, the United Kingdom signed it, the United Nations signed it. And so as such, we should be supportive of Ukraine. But we're not Ukrainians either. We should note that. We should note the desire for the gospel to go forward in Ukraine, and there have been some wonderful ministries that have done that to that end. But there has been a corruption in Ukraine that they've been trying to weed out for 30 years, but it just takes time. They were run by the Soviet Union, the communists, for since 1917 through 1991. I mean, it's hard to get rid of that level of corruption within the society. They've also been downtrodden prior to that within the Russian Empire as well, treated as peasants and second-class citizens at best. And so that's something to bear in mind. But Ukraine, likewise, has also seen the uptick of progressivism that we've seen in the United States and elsewhere. And that's something that many of us as Christians can't fully support. But we do have to allow Ukrainians to vote in their own elections and pick their own leaders and decide these types of things. But it is, like in the United States, a point of concern. And so to boil it down simply, I say significant support for Ukraine, but not without some constraints.
And then, I mean, you could have a Christian say as well, though, like, because, Lauren and I have started a business. Taxes are outrageous. It's, they're so high. I don't want to pay any, but I also want bridges and police, so I guess I have to. So, goodness sakes, it's Ukraine. We have our own problems, Doc. Couldn't the Christian position be, we're just not going to get involved because it's too expensive for American dollars to go into a foreign war?
It certainly could. I mean, that's the right of American citizens to note that. And we do have a massive national debt, some 37 or so trillion dollars. Taxes are significant. But at the same time, as you mentioned, police, bridges, roads, etc., all of these things cost money, and they do put people to work as well. It's a real and delicate balance. What I'd say, though, the challenge of not doing anything in Ukraine is that Russia much easily marches through Ukraine. Moldova's very much next. And if we take the essay, I'll go back to the 2021 essay, the same things that are true about Ukraine are true of Finland, because Finland was occupied by the Russian Empire for a century until 1917. Same is true of Poland. It was partitioned between the Prussians and the Austrians and the Russians on 3 occasions in the late 18th century, culminating in 1795 of the elimination of Poland. East Germany would fit there. And, well, why stop there as well? I mean, Russia could make claims elsewhere and beyond it. Unless Vladimir Putin is stopped, he keeps going. And that is the ultimate output. And so what's more expensive, to pay now or to pay later? I mean, maybe you never have to pay, but it means that Russia owns all of Europe. And the United States could be in the Western Hemisphere and have our space. But think about all that Russia gains if it has all the factories and industries of Europe. All of a sudden, a smaller Russia becomes hugely powerful. And speaking of Alaska, the United States, purchased under Secretary of State William Seward, we purchased Alaska. There are some Russian circles that want Alaska back. There are billboards
I didn't know that.
in Russia in the 2020s where they thought selling it was illegal and it should be nullified and it should therefore be theirs again. That's the output as well.
Goodness sakes. Okay, it's been such a fascinating discussion. Thank you for helping us deal with the complexities of international politics. Again, our guest has been Dr. Glen Duerr, Chair of the History and Government Department at Cedarville University, where he's also a professor of international studies. Tell folks why they ought to go to Cedarville.
We love the Lord. It's a place where we put the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ from Revelation 1:9 front and center. The Lord has also blessed us abundantly. We're building new buildings. In my department, we'll be in the Bolt House Academic Center in 2027, 47,000 square foot building that's being built right now. We've just come off of a $200 million capital campaign, and the Lord has blessed us in ways where we only turn back to Him to say thank you. Our student body continues to grow, but we continue to foster great discipleship where people are known. Our faculty to student ratio remains pretty low, and there's a lot that's really amazing that's happening in Southwest Ohio.
Well, we here at the Third Place and Stained Glass Media are super grateful for our partnership with Cedarville University. We love Cedarville. We highly encourage you to check it out. Go to cedarville.edu, cedarville.edu. Dr. Glen Duerr, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure, and thanks for the invitation.
And that does it for today's episode of the Third Place Podcast.
Great.
We did it, Dr. Duerr.
Thank you.